Dear friends, before watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new analysis. Something happened on February 8th, 2026 that Beijing did not expect. Not with missiles or ultimatums, with ballot papers. And yet, inside China's Politburo, the reaction looked very much like fear. To understand why, you need to go back to a single assumption that China built its entire regional strategy on. For 80 years, Beijing operated on the belief that Japan would never fight. Not really fight. That behind every destroyer, every submarine, every F-35 in Japanese service, there sat a country legally, politically, and psychologically unable to pull the trigger. That the pacifist clauses written into Japan's constitution after World War II weren't just legal text, they were chains. And Beijing believed those chains were permanent. That assumption just died. On February 8th, 2026, one party won 316 of 465 seats in Japan's most powerful legislative chamber. Not a fragile coalition, not a narrow majority held together by compromise. One party, alone. A supermajority not seen in Japan since the Second World War. The previous record was 300 seats, set in 1986. This shattered it. And the woman standing at the centre of it all is someone Beijing was already watching with great unease. Sanae Takaichi, Japan's first female prime minister. A politician who rides motorcycles, plays drums, listens to heavy metal, and spent years as the most uncompromisingly hawkish voice in a party that has dominated Japanese politics for most of the post-war era. Her father worked at an auto company. Her mother was a police officer. She did not arrive through a political dynasty. She arrived by being the one person in the room willing to say out loud what everyone else only whispered. China knew about her long before she became Prime Minister. When she took office in October 2025, Beijing immediately classified her as a threat. But a threat with a fragile coalition, limited political capital, and a constitution still standing in her way was a manageable problem. A threat with 316 seats is something else entirely. That is a threat with a mandate. And mandates change things. Now let us talk about what actually triggered this. Because this did not begin with the election. It began with 7 words. 3 months before the February vote, Takaichi was sitting in Japan's Budget Committee when she was asked a hypothetical question. Under what circumstances would a Chinese attack on Taiwan constitute a threat to Japanese security? Most politicians would have deflected. They would have spoken in diplomatic abstractions, vague enough to mean nothing and safe enough to offend nobody. Takaichi did not do that. She used a specific legal term, sonritsu kiki jitai. It translates to an existential threat situation. In Japan's security law framework, this phrase is not abstract. It is a legal trigger. When a prime minister invokes that concept in a formal parliamentary setting, it activates the legal basis under which Japan can use military force alongside an ally, even if Japan itself has not been directly attacked. What Takaichi did, on the record, as the sitting head of government, was link that trigger explicitly to Taiwan. No sitting Japanese prime minister had ever done that before. Former prime ministers had hinted at it, Politicians had made similar remarks after leaving office or in closed meetings that could be walked back. But saying it formally, in the Diet, as Prime Minister, that was a line that had never been crossed. Until she crossed it. China's response was almost immediate, and it was not measured. A senior Chinese diplomat in Osaka reposted an article about Takaichi's remarks and added exactly 7 words of his own. A rough translation. The dirty throat that interferes must be cut off. He was referring to the Prime Minister herself. The post was later deleted. The Chinese Foreign Ministry never distanced itself from it. Instead, Beijing formally demanded Takaichi retract her statement. She refused. When asked again in Parliament whether she would walk it back, she refused again. From that moment, the diplomatic relationship between two of Asia's largest economies entered what analysts described as a deep freeze. But Beijing did not stop at words. What followed was a systematic, multi-front economic pressure campaign designed to make the cost of Takaichi's position politically unbearable before the election could consolidate it. First came the student warning. China's Ministry of Education issued an advisory to over 123,000 Chinese students studying in Japan, warning of a deteriorating security environment. These students pay tuition, rent apartments, and support local economies across the country. The message was unmistakable. Then came the travel advisory. China's foreign ministry told its citizens to avoid visiting Japan for the time being. In the first 9 months of 2025, nearly 7.5 million Chinese tourists had visited Japan, roughly 1/5 of all foreign visitors. Multiple Chinese airlines immediately offered refunds. Around 500,000 trips were cancelled almost overnight. Then came seafood. China had already banned Japanese seafood imports following the Fukushima water release. Months earlier, Beijing had partially lifted that ban, and over 700 Japanese exporters had applied for re-registration, believing the situation was normalising. On November 19th, all Japanese seafood imports were halted again. No warning, no negotiations, just a door slamming shut. Japanese films scheduled for Chinese release were suspended. A trilateral cultural ministers' meeting between Japan, China, and South Korea was postponed indefinitely. On January 6, 2026, China's Commerce Ministry banned exports of dual-use goods to Japanese military end users. Precision tools, electronics, sensors, lasers, aerospace components. The first time Beijing had targeted Japan this way since 2010. Then came rare earth export controls covering 7 categories: samarium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, scandium, and yttrium. These materials are essential for electric motors, missile guidance systems, and the advanced electronics that modern military hardware depends on. Japan cannot easily source them elsewhere. Major Japanese company stocks fell within days. And then, in a move that sounds almost absurd, but carried a precise diplomatic message, China pulled the pandas. Tokyo had been negotiating to extend the stay of 2 giant pandas at Ueno Zoo. Beijing announced they would be returned a full month ahead of schedule. Economists estimated this would cost the Ueno district approximately $128 million annually in lost tourism and merchandise revenue. Recalling pandas is the diplomatic equivalent of recalling an ambassador. It is a public statement of displeasure made in the most visible way possible. Here is a question for you. Do you think Japan's supermajority makes the region safer, or does it make a war with China more likely? Drop your answer in the comments. The pressure was real, coordinated, and designed to make Takaichi blink. She didn't blink. She called an election. On January 19, 2026, Takaichi announced she was dissolving Parliament and setting February 8th as the date for a snap general election. The risk was enormous. She had been in office for less than 4 months. Her party had been losing ground for years. An election at this moment, with China actively running an economic pressure campaign against Japan, could have been framed as instability and recklessness. But Takaichi had something her predecessors lacked: real popularity. Since taking office, her approval ratings had been strikingly high. She built a genuine social media presence, engaging younger voters who had never paid attention to Japanese politics. In a country where cautious incrementalism is the default mode of governance, she was something different. She was visible, specific, and direct. She said what she meant and did not apologize for it. A few days before the vote, Donald Trump publicly expressed his support. On February 8th, the Japanese people decided. 316 seats. Together with coalition partner Japan Innovation Party's 36 seats, the ruling bloc controls 352 of 465 seats in the lower house. More than 3/4 of Parliament. Every bill Takaichi wants passed can be passed. Every vote the upper house might block can be overridden. Every institutional check the opposition might use is now outnumbered. Now let us talk about what this means in military terms, because the political story and the military story are inseparable here. Japan's defence budget for fiscal year 2026 was approved at 9.04 trillion yen, approximately $58 billion, a 9.4% increase over the previous year, the 12th consecutive record defence budget. Japan is on track to become the third largest defence spender on Earth, behind only the United States and China. The 2% of GDP target, the NATO standard the United States has demanded from allies for years, is being reached by Japan 2 years ahead of schedule. Think about that for a moment. A country with a pacifist constitution, legally prohibited from maintaining offensive military power for 80 years, is about to spend more on defence than any nation except the top 2. And nobody in Washington is asking them to slow down. The money is going to very specific things. Japan has contracted to purchase 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles from the United States, capable of striking targets at a range of approximately 1,600 kilometres. They will be fitted to 8 Aegis-equipped destroyers. The destroyer JS Chokai is currently being converted and is expected to be operational with Tomahawk capability by March 2026. For the first time since 1945, Japan is acquiring offensive long-range strike weapons. The country that imposed pacifism on Japan is now selling it the missiles to end that pacifism. The irony speaks for itself. Japan is also spending $6.2 billion on standoff weapons, including $1.13 billion for domestically developed Type 12 anti-ship missiles, upgraded from roughly 200 kilometres range to approximately 1,000 kilometres. Ground, ship and air-launched variants are in development. The ground-based version is already deployed with missile regiments on Kyushu. Japan is co-developing a next-generation stealth fighter with the United Kingdom and Italy, designed to fly alongside AI-controlled drone wingmen, with entry into service around 2035. Australia has selected a Japanese defence manufacturer to build upgraded frigates, meaning Japan is now exporting warship technology for the first time since World War II. But the most strategically significant development is not about what Japan is buying. It is about where it is deploying it. Look at a map of Japan's southwestern islands. The Ryukyu chain stretches from Japan's main islands across the East China Sea like a string of stepping stones, forming a natural barrier between the Pacific Ocean and the Chinese mainland. At the far end sits Yonaguni Island, Japan's westernmost inhabited territory. Yonaguni is approximately 111 kilometers from Taiwan's coast. On a clear day, from Yonaguni's western cape, you can see Taiwan's mountains. Tokyo is more than 2,000 kilometers in the opposite direction. Japan has been quietly militarizing this island chain for years, building what military planners call an anti-access area denial network, a system designed to make it extraordinarily costly for China to project military power into the Pacific. Yonaguni received its first garrison in 2016. Ishigaki received anti-ship and air defense missile batteries from 2023. In 2024, 7 ground-to-sea missile companies were deployed across Miyako, Ishigaki, and the Amami Islands. Electronic warfare units capable of jamming enemy radar and communications are now stationed on Yonaguni. In the critical opening hours of any conflict in the Taiwan Strait, Chinese forces could be blinded before reaching their targets. China tolerated Japan's military build-up for decades because of Article 9's legal fiction. As long as Japan maintained it could not conduct offensive operations, Beijing could tell itself that those destroyers and submarines were essentially theatrical, that Japan would stay out of any Taiwan conflict regardless of what happened. Takaichi destroyed that fiction with one statement in a budget committee. And now she has 316 seats to reinforce it. The United States stations approximately 53,000 active duty troops in Japan, more than in any other country on Earth. Roughly half are on Okinawa, including around 19,000 Marines of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force, trained specifically for amphibious operations and rapid crisis response. These are the forces that would be in motion first if a Taiwan contingency developed. Japan's own Maritime Self-Defense Force operates 155 vessels, including 4 aircraft-carrying warships reclassified to carry F-35B fighters, 36 Aegis destroyers, and 23 attack submarines, considered among the quietest conventionally powered submarines in the world. The Soryu-class boats run on advanced lithium-ion batteries, making them exceptionally difficult to detect. The newer Taigei class, with upgraded systems, is now entering service. By total tonnage, Japan operates the 6th largest navy on Earth. Nearly every ship is modern, well-maintained, and crewed by highly trained professionals. Now consider the geography. The distance from Okinawa to Taiwan is approximately 630 kilometers. Roughly the same distance the Allied invasion fleet crossed from England to Normandy on D-Day. That operation required years of planning, total air and sea superiority, and still resulted in catastrophic casualties. China's challenge would be categorically harder. Unlike the open water of the English Channel, the Ryukyu chain forms a physical barrier through which any Chinese naval force would have to either punch through or navigate around, all while under fire from hundreds of kilometres of missile-equipped island terrain. This is what China's military planners see when they look at the map, and it is why many analysts point to 2027 as the year China's People's Liberation Army was originally assessed as being ready to attempt a Taiwan operation. Because after 2027, the arithmetic becomes progressively worse for Beijing. Every additional year gives Japan more tomahawks, deeper US integration, and a more formidable defensive ring. The window is not fixed, it is closing. Here is a question nobody wants to ask out loud. What if a stronger Japan doesn't prevent a Chinese attack on Taiwan, but accelerates one? Consider it from Beijing's perspective. Every year that passes shifts the military equation further against China. If planners believe that acting in 2027 means facing a partially integrated Japan-US strike network, while waiting until 2030 means facing a fully operational one, the logic of moving sooner rather than later becomes harder to dismiss. Build strong enough defences, and you convince an adversary aggression is futile. Build too fast, too visibly, with explicit warnings about what those defences are for, and you may convince the same adversary that waiting is not the safer option. China demonstrated its thinking in the final days of 2025, when the PLA conducted large-scale exercises codenamed Justice Mission 2025, explicitly simulating the seizure and blockade of Taiwan. In November that year, a state-controlled newspaper published an editorial questioning Japan's sovereignty over the Ryukyu Islands, arguing the Ryukyu Kingdom had tributary ties to China before Japan's annexation in the 1870s. Articles in that publication do not appear by accident. Every argument is reviewed and approved. Raising the question of Japanese sovereignty over Okinawa is not a historical footnote. It is a warning signal aimed directly at Tokyo. Here is your second question. If China did take military action in the Taiwan Strait, do you think Japan would actually intervene? Write your answer in the comments. This one is important. Takeuchi is not an isolated figure acting on instinct. She is the direct political heir of Shinzo Abe, Japan's longest-serving post-war prime minister, the man who rewrote Japan's security laws in 2015 to permit collective self-defense, and designed the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy as a structural counterweight to China's expanding regional influence. Abe was assassinated in 2022, but his strategic vision did not die with him. It found a successor, and that successor just won the most decisive electoral mandate in Japan's post-war history. This matters because Takeuchi's agenda is not improvised. It is the continuation of a decade-long transformation that began quietly under Abe, accelerated through successive governments, and is now operating without the political constraints that limited every one of her predecessors. Before February, she lacked the numbers to override the upper house. She lacked the supermajority to propose constitutional amendments. All of that is now gone. She can propose changes to Article 9, something that has literally never happened in Japan's 78-year post-war constitutional history. Whether those amendments pass ultimately depends on a national referendum that no Japanese voter has ever experienced before. Polls show split results that vary depending on how the question is framed. Younger voters lean toward change. Older voters, especially in Okinawa, where the memories of the 1945 battle remain vivid, lean strongly against militarization. Nobody knows how that referendum would turn out, but the ability to put the question directly to the Japanese people for the first time ever is itself a transformation. Takeuchi has confirmed plans to revise Japan's national defense strategy by December 2026, expanding the legal scenarios in which Japan would be authorized to use military force. In March, she visits Donald Trump at the White House, a meeting Trump announced before Japan's final vote count was even complete. In April, Trump meets Xi Jinping in Beijing. Tokyo, Washington, and Beijing will form a diplomatic triangle under stress that has not been tested like this since the Cold War. China insists a single election changes nothing, and yet it has recalled pandas, banned seafood, suspended flights, restricted rare earths, prohibited dual-use technology sales, issued student and travel warnings, and declared dialogue unacceptable. That is a comprehensive policy response from a country that claims its policy has not changed. Meanwhile, Japan's transformation continues regardless. Contracts are signed, missiles are being delivered, island fortifications are expanding. A stealth fighter is under development. Destroyers are being retrofitted. The legal architecture for intervention in a Taiwan contingency has been declared at the prime ministerial level and backed by the largest democratic mandate Japan has produced in living memory. 80 years ago, the United States wrote pacifism into Japan's constitution to prevent a repeat of the destruction that swept across Asia. Today, the same United States is selling Japan the weapons to end that pacifism, deepening joint military exercises and welcoming Japan's first female prime minister to Washington. The assumption that guided China's strategy for a generation, a Japan too constrained, too cautious, and too scarred to ever fight again, collapsed on February 8th in a single election result. And now, one final question, a different kind. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your country in the comments below. We read every single one. The gap between 80 years of peace and a war that could redefine the century is narrower than it has ever been. It sits at the intersection of deterrence and provocation, of a Japan that waited patiently and a China that bet the waiting would last forever. On that narrow ridge, neither side fully controls what comes next, and that, more than any missile or mandate, is the most dangerous thing of all.